Hey, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Topics today include reactive, reviews, and reluctance.
Wrong! What's wrong with you? What's wrong with y'all?
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you people? Wrong! You do have to tolerate it. It's my show.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm here to talk about politics, culture, religion, sports, and anything else you're not allowed to talk about in polite company. Issue number 1! Stimulated. I was reading this pundit. He was going off on this other article about caffeine, the silent killer. And what the article that was being complained about was talking about was this is so meta. This is a podcast talking about an article, talking about a study of caffeine. So many layers. Anyway, 92 people a year in the United States die from caffeine overdoses. 92. Did you know that you could die from a caffeine overdose? Much less did you know 92 people were dying from a caffeine overdose. And, by all means, with 330 million people, caffeine is not the greatest threat to our livelihoods or our lives. Why did I say livelihoods? If anything, caffeine inspires many, many people's livelihoods. Some of you are like, yes, right now, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. So this guy that was complaining about this other article, he was saying, and then the article went on to say that drinking 10 to 14 cups a day will kill you. And I was like, wait, 10 to 14 cups of coffee can kill you? Like that people might actually die if they drink that much coffee? So I went on Facebook and I'm just like, hey, no context for my question. I just said, how many cups of coffee have you drunk in a day? Like, what's your max? When you were really going for it, what mark did you hit? And people immediately are like, 12 cups, 14 cups. And then occasional people like me, like 0 cups, because me and other people, we don't drink coffee. And we still want in on it, right? Just because we don't drink coffee doesn't mean we can't say that we drink 0. And then a friend of mine, he goes, back when I was in the Navy, during Desert Storm, regularly, 16 to 19 cups of coffee a day. And this is like blowing my mind. I'm like, wow. Like people are routinely risking death for coffee. So I went back to the first article to make sure I read it right. And I did. He said 10 to 14 cups. So I clicked on the link to the article he was referring to. And that article had this chart. And they showed, like how much caffeine people consume from a Coke and from a coffee and from a Red Bull. And if you drink 10 cups of coffee, you will ingest 1 gram of caffeine. If you ingest 10 to 14 grams of caffeine, you will probably die. Now, do you see what just happened there? 10 cups equals 1 gram. 10 to 14 grams equals death. There's a multiplication factor in there. So just so you know, because this is important, caffeine is the silent killer. If you drink, I'll do the math for you. If you drink 100 to 140 cups of coffee, you might die. And I just want to know, is that even possible to drink 100 to 140 cups of coffee? You can actually die of overhydration. People have died from drinking too much water in a day. And I gotta guess that 100 to 140 cups of coffee will be risking death in more ways than one. Issue number 2, interfaith. I was just asked to be a guest on a YouTube show called Mormon Book Reviews, and I had a lot of fun with the host, Steve. And if you would like to hear that interview, I will leave a link in the show notes for episode 86. And I would love for you to come listen. I talk about my adventures with Mormonism. And in particular, I share a story that changed my life involving some Mormon missionaries who actually ran away from me. They didn't just run away from me. They sprinted away from me after engaging in a conversation with me. And it boggled my mind, and it should boggle yours too. You'll want to hear the rest of that story. Go to episode 86 and find the link to my interview on Mormon book reviews. Hey, it's time. What are the rules?
Oh, what are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules?
My wife, the lovely Wendy, she told me that she has been listening to some other podcasts. And let's just say that made it awkward. Like, is this podcast not enough for you?
Wrong!
The lovely Wendy, she has started her own crusade, and I am bringing it to you because this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the kind of energy I want from all of you. In not one, but at least 2 podcasts she listens to, the host will refer to a promo code or a website they want you to go to, and they'll say .com/contact or /promo. And when you use the internet, there is almost no need for the /. The / is not part of the conversation on the World Wide Web. It's the /. It's .com/contact. Or you could just say /contact. So the lovely Wendy, she emailed one podcast and said, hey, just so you know, it's not /, it's /. And they didn't respond, but in the next episode, they corrected it and started saying /. So she's like, what is this new power? So she emailed somebody else. And immediately upon receiving her email, they went, oh, of course. Thank you for that correction. Yes, we will fix that from here on out. So there you go. What's the rule? Always /forward. Remember, I want to know what's wrong with you.
What's wrong with you?
If you'd like to submit a comment, question, or tell me how I was wrong, you can email me at listen@thewrongpodcast.com or submit a comment at my website, thewrongpodcast.com. And help me spread the wrong message. If you like what you hear, share it with your friends. Now it's time for my favorite part of the show. I was wrong.
I was wrong. I was wrong.
Listener Matt writes in concerning episode 85 and says, my wife and I share a Google Calendar. She had a lot of questions about why I entered polygamy legal in 2029. Listener Rachel also chimed in and said, ooh snap. Issue number 3, reluctant. I want to tell you about this guy. His name is Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke was a British politician. He lived around the time of the U.S. Revolutionary War. And let me tell you, if Edmund Burke had his way, we Americans would probably have been really invested in the coronation of King Charles recently, because we would still be British citizens or Commonwealthers. What are people in Canada and Australia called other than Canadian and Australian? Anyway, he had some good ideas about how to prevent the American Revolutionary War, and I think they would have worked. But more importantly, Edmund Burke had a problem with the way that the British were acting in India. Immense cruelty in India. Immense cruelty. And he did not like it, nor should he. And one of the arguments he made against the cruelty in India wasn't that it was bad for the Indians experiencing the cruelty, which it was, and that would have been an argument enough. But he said, hey, this is bad for us here on Britain. because all of those British officers, those British soldiers who were treating the Indians cruelly, they are learning to be cruel. And eventually, those guys are going to come back to Britain and rule us. They're going to be in charge here. Eventually, they're going to be the top level politicians. They're going to be in charge of security and policing. And they've learned to be cruel. And we are going to suffer for it. And I'll just add to that, it wasn't just the people who were being cruel that are going to be the problem. It's the people who are being permissive of the cruelty who are going to be a problem. Because they've learned to just let things go, to cast a blind eye to things that should not be allowed to go on. Which means they too will come back from India to Britain and continue to act permissively in the face of cruelty. Along these lines, I was just listening to Chris Stirewalt on his Inkstain Wretches podcast, and he was talking about Roger Ailes, the former president of Fox News, who really made Fox News what it is. And he, unfortunately, had a very notorious sexual abuse problem going on within Fox News because he was a sexual abuser. So it comes from the top. And this is one thing Chris Stirewalt had to say about some other controversy that's come up, but reflecting back on who Roger Ailes was at Fox News.
He created the space for it, but it was really Roger Ailes who did it, and Roger Ailes ran it much better than Murdoch did, except for at the end. And this is what this narrative forgets. And what this narrative forgets is that by the closing years of his time at Fox News, he was a badly diminished figure. And he was diminished because of those problems, that his personal problems. Those were the things that brought Roger Ailes down. And if he had not been corrupted in that way, that the American political history would have a different tenor to it today. But I do not expect the widow of a man to say, well, it's complicated, right?
Well, it's interesting because you would think that the widow of his widow would be most acutely aware that his personal problems played this outsized role in.
But if you create a
complicating
permission structure for people, this is the problem with monster making, right? If you create permission structures for people in which they are allowed to misbehave because of what they're doing is really important, what do? You get a lot more misbehavior. And the lesson of the Fox News sex scandals, and then the Me Too movement that rolled through the news business, Mark Halperin, Charlie Rose, like you can list them off, was when you create monsters, they will behave monstrously, right? And if you give them this kind of space in which to operate, they will indeed misbehave.
Now, I bring these two stories up because there was a recent news story about a sexual assault trial involving Donald Trump and a woman named E. Jean Carroll. And when the verdict was handed down, it scandalized me. I became incensed over what had happened. And I'm going to, I need to get this out. I've had this conversation a couple of times with different people, and I haven't been satisfied with how I've presented my feelings on the issue. So for my own sake, I need space to lay this out for myself, and hopefully you can benefit from it too. But just so you know, I'm going to be describing sexual assault. And I'm not going to be salacious or voyeuristic about it by any means, but there are some facts that I think you need to know about what happened. So if that's an issue for where you are right now or who you happen to be listening to, consider this fair warning. So 30 years ago, this woman, her name is Jean Carroll, she was kind of a New York socialite. She had been a writer on Saturday Night Live. She had a column in Elle magazine. She met Donald Trump at a department store to help him go buy a gift for someone. And this was kind of a date. They were hanging out, they were flirting with each other, they were teasing one another. At some point, he throws some lingerie at her and says, hey, you should go try this on. And it's like a midday, midweek time and place of this department store. It's not super busy. They find themselves in a quiet part of the department store, and they go into a dressing room together. And immediately upon entering the dressing room, Donald Trump starts kissing her and forces himself upon her, and very, very quickly puts his fingers inside of her and then pushes her down and then rapes her. This is her story. And afterwards, Jean immediately tells two friends what happened. This isn't years go by, this isn't weeks go by, this is almost immediately. She tells two friends what had just happened to her at the hands of Donald Trump. And the two friends had very different reactions. The first friend said, you need to call the cops. You need to call the cops. The second friend said, no, do not call the cops. He is a rich, famous, and powerful man in New York City, and he will bury you. You have no chance of this working out for you if you call the cops. You can't win this case. Just spare yourself the embarrassment. Move on. So she decided to take the second friend's advice. And unfortunately, it didn't just go away for her. And she spent the next several decades trying to work through what had happened in this dressing room with a therapist. So she presents this evidence in court. And this is not a criminal trial. It's a civil trial. So she's suing him because he had said, when she said, hey, Donald Trump raped me, he said, she's a liar. I don't know who she is. I never did that. And this is a wacky hoax. And she's like, okay, so I'm going to sue you for the rape and sexual assault and for defamation of character because you're calling me a liar. So she tells her story in court. And as part of the evidence of the story, the two friends both testify, her therapist testifies, and they also bring on several other women who also say similar things have happened to them at the hands of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has done this more than once to other women. So they bring those other women on, and then they play the Access Hollywood tape, which you are probably familiar with, but just in case I want to remind you of it, here is what Donald Trump bragged about to Billy Bush.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. I can do anything.
Now, when this tape originally came out in 2016, Donald Trump said two things about it. The first was he said, it's not true. It's fake. Didn't happen. That's not me. Second thing he said was, it was me, but it was just locker room talk. I wouldn't do that. Just locker room talk. Just pretend. I'm just bragging about things that have never happened. So before the trial, there's a thing called a deposition, where both attorneys are allowed to talk to prospective witnesses to get them to clarify certain things about what happened, to find more evidence. And Donald Trump was brought in for this deposition, and Jean Carroll's attorneys played the Access Hollywood tape for him and asked him, is this true? Do you believe this? And this is what he had to say in that deposition.
In this video, I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet, just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the you can do anything. That's what you said, correct?
Well, historically, that's true with stars.
It's true with stars that they can grab women by the
Well, that's what it's. If you look over the last million years, I guess that's been largely true. Not always, but largely true. Unfortunately or fortunately.
And you consider yourself to be a star?
I think you can say that, yeah.
Now, the first thing that stands out to me is that he believes he is a star, and he believes that this is what stars do, what stars are allowed to do. This is a normal thing for stars. He's a star. It kind of sounds like he feels entitled to it. Mind you, this is, 6-7 years since we've all become aware of the Access Hollywood tape? Since it nearly threatened his own political career? He's had time to think about his response to this tape. I would hope that when played this tape and asked, do you believe this? He would say, no, I didn't believe it. I would never do that. I was just guffawing with this guy who I was hoping to impress. Instead, he doubles down. He says, yes, this is what stars do. And yes, I'm a star. And there is one phrase that really caught my attention. Fortunately or unfortunately, it happens. Fortunately? Who is it fortunate for that this is the way stars are allowed to behave? Why is the word fortunately even on his lips? What made it occur to him to use that word fortunately? So Donald Trump, of course, in the court case, he is allowed to present his own defense. And pre-trial, before the trial started, his lawyer listed 2 possible witnesses. One was Donald Trump himself, who did not attend the trial at all. He not only did not testify in his own defense, he didn't even show up at the court. For other reasons, doesn't make him guilty by any means. A lot of good reasons for him not to show up. The other person who was supposed to testify on Donald Trump's behalf was a psychiatrist. And when it came time for him to testify, Donald Trump's lawyer said, oh, the psychiatrist is sick and can't make it, so he won't be testifying. Now, we have no idea what the psychiatrist was going to testify to. Other than, I'm guessing he would have said, I wasn't at the department store on that day, so I don't have any knowledge of those events. I don't know if he was Jean Carroll's psychiatrist. He didn't show up, so we don't know what he had to say. I think, and I couldn't verify this anywhere, so hold this really lightly. I think that he was going to testify that when you come off certain kinds of psychiatric drugs, that you can experience trauma from that, which is true. And again, I don't know if that's what he's actually going to testify to, so there's no reason to debate the relevance to this case because he didn't testify. So in the face of Jean Carroll's testimony and the testimony of all of her witnesses and the Access Hollywood tape and the deposition where Donald Trump told us more about his feelings concerning the Access Hollywood tape, and because he presented no defense at all, the jury found him liable for sexual assault and for defamation of character. And they did not find him liable for rape. Now, I just want to clarify, again, this was not a criminal trial. This was a civil trial. And the difference is, and it's important, in a criminal trial, the jury has to find you guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt. Or not beyond a shadow of a doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt. You can have doubts, but they have to be reasonable. And that is not the standard in a civil trial. In a civil trial, they just have to determine that it's more likely than not that it actually happened. So beyond 50% chance, is this what happened? And the 9 jurors were unanimous that yes, it's more likely than not that this actually happened. And now it is in the public record that Donald Trump is liable for sexual assault. They're saying, the court records say Donald Trump sexually assaulted Jean Carroll. Now, Donald Trump he did not put on a defense in this trial. And it's given the evidence that was presented and given that he made no defense in the case, it's not surprising they found him liable. In public, he has defended himself. He's made 3 defenses for himself regarding this trial. The first one is that he did not know her. And there are pictures of he and Jean Carroll together, laughing together at a party. Now, it's possible he did not know her. Maybe there was just a group of people, but they've at least met, and we have photographic evidence of it. The second defense that he's made is that he has said, she's not my type. And it boggles my mind that anybody would think this is a good defense against rape or sexual assault. She is not my type. That implies that he would rape somebody, he would sexually assault someone if they were his type. Now, rape is not a sexual crime. It's a crime of power. It's about power dynamics. And it doesn't matter to many, many rapists what their victim looks like. Many unattractive people have been raped. Many people who were not the rapist type have been raped by the rapist. She's not my type is not a defense of sexual assault. Furthermore, they showed Donald Trump a picture of Jean Carroll at the time. And they asked him, who is this woman? And he said, that's Marla. Marla Maples was his wife at the time. He was shown a picture of Jean Carroll and thought it was probably his wife, Marla Maples. Which implies that maybe she was his type. The third defense he's made in public is that he can't get a fair trial in New York. He's from New York, but there is no way any jury in New York City will ever side with him. It's just not a fair place where he can get a trial. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that his lawyer participates in the jury selection pool. They get to weed people out. They get to dismiss people and come to a consensus jury with the other side. And one of the jurors, he listens to a right-wing podcast. And when asked about the podcast, he said, yes, I think he's actually fair and balanced. And Jean Carroll's attorneys called for that juror to be dismissed because he listens to this right-wing podcast. And Donald Trump's attorney said, Your Honor, you cannot dismiss a juror because of their political preferences. Political preferences is not a legitimate reason to dismiss any juror. So Donald Trump's attorney has made the argument for us that this jury was fair because we cannot dismiss them based on their political preferences. And at least one guy kind of sides with Donald Trump, and he agreed with the other 8 jurors. So, evaluating this, you might be thinking to yourself, one thing I should add about all of this is that Jean Carroll cannot name the exact date that this attack happened. She can't give us a day or a time. And that makes sense because it happened 30 years ago. But it also questions whether or not it happened. And the jury was faced with that decision. Does this matter that she can't name the day? So when you're looking at this, you might say, hey, looking at this evidence, there's no way if I was on a jury, I would find him guilty in a criminal case. There's not enough here to say beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty. You might also say, hey, if I was on this jury for this civil trial, that I would not say it was more likely than not that it happened. I'm not convinced by the evidence that I've heard so far. And let me just say something real quick. I'm giving you a summation of a trial. Trials are our best way that we've come up with in our culture, in our context, to come to the truth of a matter. Juries get things wrong all the time. Justice isn't always served in court, but this is the best system we have. We have an adversarial system where an attorney is allowed to question the witnesses, allowed to scrutinize what they're saying, to find holes, to make sure that they're consistent, and both sides are allowed to do that to each other's witnesses. And more often than not, juries are given the truth about a situation. Not always, but more often than not. And whatever you think of the jury system, whatever you think of the court system, it's a way better way of coming to the truth of things than arguing about it on social media. You're more likely to find the truth in a court case than you'll ever find in the comments section of YouTube. And you're more likely to find out the truth of a matter in a court case than you will listening to a guy on a podcast giving you a summation of the court case. So let's all just confess that we don't have nearly as much information as the jury had about this situation. Still, you might say, hey, there's not enough here for me to say that he would be guilty of a criminal conviction. There's not enough here for me to say he is guilty based on the civil standards for evidence. And I have a question for you. Do you think O.J. Simpson is a murderer? He was acquitted in his criminal trial. He was found liable for murder in his civil trial. The way the U.S. media was allowed to talk about O.J. Simpson after that civil trial changed drastically. Suddenly, people could say, if you called O.J. Simpson a murderer after his acquittal, after his criminal trial, O.J. Simpson could sue you for defamation and for libel because you accused him of something that the court found to be untrue. After the civil trial, all of the media sources in America were able and did call him a murderer without any harm coming to them through civil action on, based on defamation or libel. You were allowed to say O.J. Simpson is a murderer because of what happened in the civil trial. It is official public record. It's not the same as a criminal case, but it's still official. Going forward, the record books show that Donald Trump sexually assaulted Jean Carroll. He is a man who is known to sexually assault women. And you for sure are not currently deciding if he's guilty. Maybe you wouldn't decide he's guilty. Maybe you wouldn't decide he's liable, but that is not your job right now. Your job as a U.S. citizen is to evaluate him for a job. He's in a job interview with you. He wants to be the president. And it's your job to decide, is this the kind of person I want working for me? This is a job interview. And what you have in front of you now is the knowledge that he sexually assaults women. Would you hire this man to be a part of your company knowing that he sexually assaults women? Would you put him in charge of anything, knowing that he sexually assaults women? Now, most people, when they voted for Trump, I think were actually rather reluctant Trump voters. To be sure, there are people who are all on board. They love everything about him. They think he is righteous, and that any accusation against him comes from the devil. But most people are like, hey, you know what? I don't like the guy. I recognize that he's kind of a braggart. He's known for exaggeration. He's for sure egotistical. I can confess that he's probably immoral, but you know, like, at the bottom line, he's got some good policies. And there's a lot of unnecessary attacks on him. Like, everything he does is attacked. Like, everything he does is made out to be the worst thing in the world. Most of the people who voted for Trump are along those lines. They're like, I don't like him, but I don't need to like him. I just need to know that he's not the other side. What the other side wants to do is much worse, and I kind of like some of the things he's about. I kind of like that he sticks his thumb in the eye of the media, who are always on his case about everything. We need somebody like that, who, like, is able to shout down the media. Like, and so I'm okay with that. I don't like him, but I'd rather have him than whatever the other side is offering me. And I get that. I get all of this. And I think, I don't just think, I truly believe that almost everybody who voted for Donald Trump are actually pretty good people with a proper sense of morality. I'm not patronizing anybody. I really do think that most of the people who voted for Donald Trump really do have a decent sense of morality. They're good, decent people. This is not a view that's shared by many on the left. To many people in our country, one side is good and one side is evil. I know that to not be the case. So I want to talk to the people who were reluctant about Donald Trump, but nevertheless went along and voted for him for a number of good reasons. I'm not talking to the people who are all aboard the MAGA train. You know who those people are. I have no hope of convincing them to rethink their decision to keep moving forward with Donald Trump. They love the man. They want the man, warts and all. They love the warts. Most people are not that. Most people are like, hey, if you can give me somebody better, I'll take him. One of the reasons people have voted for Donald Trump is because of this idea of voting for the lesser of two evils. Hey, there's some things I dislike about both candidates or about both sides, about both political parties. I need to choose one or the other. I'm given a binary choice, and if I had a third choice, maybe I would take it, but I don't have that. One of these two people are going to win the election. I've got to choose. And therefore, I'm going to go with whoever policies I agree with more. It doesn't matter about their character. What they tell me they want to do, I want to hear what they say they're going to do with the country. And I want to shape the country their way rather than the other person's way. A lot of policy things to disagree about, right? Between both sides. And at some point, this idea of lesser of two evils over policy, I don't think is your bottom line. I think it's the general operating procedure for most people for good reason. But at some point, somebody's character will come into it for you. If during a debate, one candidate pulled out a whip and started whipping the other candidate and calling them the nastiest, filthiest words in the world because they didn't like their answers, you'd be like, whoa, like, this is not civil discourse. Like, we can't have this. It doesn't matter what the policies are. We can't have people thinking that this is the right way to disagree, particularly at the top of our leadership structure. This can't be okay. If a candidate was known to just publicly slap children as hard as he could, you'd be like, no, I'm not voting for that guy. Like, I may not vote for his opponent, but I'm for sure not voting for him. I'm not giving him his support. At some point, you know that character matters, right? Like, there is some line that you would say, I'm not crossing this. Like, he's having sex with children publicly. Like, he's publicly confessing it. I'm not going along with that guy, even though I agree with him on all of his policy decisions. Now, these are extreme examples. I'm giving you the far end of the spectrum, just so you can agree that at some point you have a line. I'm merely asking you, is rape and sexual assault at your line? Is your line on one side or the other of sexual assault? And I think most people would say, I can't go along with a rapist. Like, I just can't. The other thing about this lesser of two evils argument is that this is currently not a binary choice. We are not choosing between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Right now, this is a primary election. The candidates are posturing themselves. They're earning their money. They're promoting their name. They're trying to get an early lead. These are Republican candidates. There's at least 8 of them that I could name that are trying to put their name out there for the future Republican primary. Some of them are lining up with Donald Trump on everything. They want to present themselves as the other Trump. Look, I'm just as good as Trump on all of these policy things you agree with. I'm just more effective, and I haven't sexually assaulted anyone. There's more than one candidate like that. You are not choosing between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. You're choosing between Donald Trump and at least 8 other people who mostly agree with Donald Trump. Now, partisanship is at a high right now. People really, really don't like the other side. And many people on the one thing actually both sides agree on is that they don't like the direction the country is headed in. And it's not uncommon for Republican voters to feel like this country is going to hell. A lot of issues facing this country. And if they are not corrected, the country will go to hell. And I just want to say, there is more than one way for a country to go to hell. There's more than one way. The Democrats offer one version. Electing a man who sexually assaults women is another version of hell. This will have massive impact on our country and our culture if we elect somebody who's been found liable in court of sexually assaulting women. This means it's okay. There's no cultural consequences for acting this way towards women. This means you can expect other men to behave this way. You can expect other leaders to behave this way. Remember what the friend of Jean Carroll said? The second friend. She said, hey, don't take this to the police. It won't matter. It won't work. You won't hurt him. You'll be the only one who gets hurt. Imagine moving forward if you're the victim of sexual assault and you're accusing a powerful person of hurting you, and you look and see who the President of the United States is and whether or not you have any chance against this person who's hurt you, who's also in power. This is what Russell Moore had to say recently.
And what's primarily shocking is the fact that here we are in a week where a former president of the United States is found liable for sexual abuse and sexual assault and defamation of a woman who survived such abuse and assault, and the country just yawns for the most part. That tells me that something has really, really badly gone awry in this country. And you add to it the demeanor and the content of President Trump's deposition to simply shrug off and defend the Access Hollywood comments. In 2015, I said that President Trump had or Donald Trump at the time, had the attitude toward women of a Bronze Age warlord. In that deposition, he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, predated it back to millions of years ago, and said, unfortunately or fortunately, that's the way that it is. Well, think about the teenage girl in a church somewhere who's being abused by her youth pastor, wondering whether to come forward. And she hears not only that, but when the victim is ridiculed by a presidential candidate in front of a crowd, the response is laughter. That has devastating implications.
We have a decision. Which of Jean Carroll's friends was right? Was it the first friend who said go to the police, or was it the second friend who said don't bother, it won't matter? Now, the other thing about a political leader is that once they earn their party's nomination, the entire party kind of bends to conform to who that person is and what they believe. There are differences between all of the primary candidates, But once the candidate is chosen, those differences diminish because everybody needs to unify behind the vision of the person who won the nomination. And this was very clear in 2016 when Donald Trump won the nomination. There were a lot of principles that the conservative Republican Party believed in that they let go because Donald Trump did not believe in them. It's a very normal and natural thing for a party to become who their leader is, right? It comes from the top. That's a phrase we've all heard because it's true. And just look at how political discourse has changed in the last 7 years since Donald Trump came on the scene. Things are a lot nastier now. He's normalized a lot of behaviors for how we talk to one another and what we expect politicians to be talking about or talking how they're behaving. There are things he does and says in political context that would have scandalized us 10 years ago. We'd be like, there's no way anybody could say these kinds of things. And now we don't just allow them. People applaud him for behaving in these radically different ways. He's very clearly changed us. He's very clearly changed our character. Now that we know that he sexually assaults women, do you think that won't change our culture any more than he already has? Now, I've heard from many people that, hey, look, all of these politicians have something in their histories. If we just go digging into all of them, I'm sure we'll find something about them. And I'll stand here and continue to say, hey, I'm not going to vote for a man who sexually assaults women. And if you can show me evidence that any other politician has sexually assaulted women, I will say I'm not voting for them either. Whether it's Joe Biden or Ron DeSantis or Kamala Harris or anybody, sexual assault and rape are not okay. That's my line. That's one of the things that are on my line. It's well beyond my line, to be honest. If it's public, you need to act on it. And just assuming that it's true of other people or it might be true of other people, that's not good enough. Like, we now know the public record shows that he sexually assaults women. That has to be something you factor in a way that's different than anybody who you might suspect of sexually assaulting women or anybody who you might be cynically prone to suspect just because they're in power. You know, Bill Clinton, he raped Juanita Broaddrick. I believe that to be true, even though he has not been found guilty of it in a court of law. And he created a permission structure for when Donald Trump came along for Republicans to say, hey, you want to complain about Donald Trump, but what about Bill Clinton? You didn't care then, so why should we care now? And if Republicans let Donald Trump proceed with his candidacy despite sexually assaulting women, then the next Democrat who's prone to do this sort of thing is going to say, hey, you didn't care about this stuff for Donald Trump, so why should you care about what I'm doing? And you can be sure somebody from the Democratic Party is going to be engaged in this kind of stuff in the future. You want to be able to say, no, I didn't stand with Donald Trump when we knew that he sexually assaulted women, and I won't let you get away with it either. It doesn't matter what party you're from. This is something that we're not going to allow. Now, I bring all of this up. I'm kind of hinging the whole argument against Donald Trump on one thing and one thing only. There's a lot of other things that should make you worried or nervous about Donald Trump. He's already been indicted in one criminal probe in New York. He has 3 other possible criminal indictments coming. 3 more possible indictments for criminal activity coming. That is just chaos, and that is for sure going to scare away other voters. In addition, he's been impeached twice. And the January 6th riots and sedition, those hang over them in the minds of many, many voters. Independent voters were so tired of Donald Trump and his antics that they were willing to elect a man who campaigned from his basement. Independent voters turned away from Donald Trump in massive, massive numbers. And they're like, we don't care who he is. We don't care how sleepy or tired or old he is. We don't care if he's senile. He's not Donald Trump. If you are really worried about Joe Biden, if you are really, really worried about the agenda of the Democratic Party, can you risk nominating Donald Trump? Is he worth the risk? Or is there somebody else who might agree with Donald Trump quite a bit, but doesn't carry the baggage that Donald Trump does?
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
But I could be wrong. If you think I am, let me know. And let me know why. I had fun and I hope you did too. Bye-bye.